At first she was happy, hugging it tight. Then she suddenly froze. "Grandpa," she whispered, "what is this?" I took a closer look and felt my face go pale. I started digging, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. 3 days later, the police showed up at my son's mansion, and the entire family empire began to crumble. My name is Harry Sullivan. I am 70 years old, and I spent 40 years of my life as a cargo inspector at the port of Newark. I know the smell of fake leather, I know the weight of contraband, and I know when someone is lying to my face. But nothing prepared me for the lie I walked into last Saturday. Before I tell you what I found inside that bear, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. Your support helps me expose the truth. I stood in the corner of the Donovan family's sprawling living room, clutching a glass of lukewarm water. I felt like a stain on their pristine white carpet. This was my granddaughter Lily's 10th birthday party, but it felt more like a corporate merger event. Men in three-piece suits were discussing stocks, and women were comparing diamond sizes. I was wearing my best suit, a navy blue wool blend I bought 10 years ago for my wife's funeral. I had pressed it myself that morning, but standing next to Richard Donovan, I looked like a beggar. Richard is my son's father-in-law. He owns half the commercial real estate in the city. He walked over to me holding a crystal flute of champagne like it was a royal scepter. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the slightly frayed cuff of my shirt. "Harry, so glad you could make it," Richard said, his voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "I see you decided to go with the vintage look today. Very bold. Is that the same suit you wore to the wedding 12 years ago? You really get your money's worth, don't you?" A few guests chuckled. I felt the heat rise up my neck. I gripped my water glass tighter, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to tell him that this suit was bought with honest money, money earned by breaking my back in freezing warehouses, while he was likely bribing city officials for zoning permits. But I didn't. I swallowed my pride. I did it for Patrick, my son, and I did it for Lily. "It's good to see you too, Richard," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just try not to brush against the curtains." "Harry?" Richard laughed, patting my shoulder with a heavy condensing hand. "They are imported silk. Stains are a nightmare to get out." He walked away, leaving me standing there, burning with humiliation. I looked across the room at my son Patrick. He was standing near the buffet table, looking pale and nervous. He didn't make eye contact with me. He was busy refilling wine glasses for Richard's friends. My heart broke a little. My son wasn't a partner in this family. He was a servant. Suddenly the music stopped. It was time for the main event. Monica, my daughter-in-law, clapped her hands for attention. She looked stunning in a red dress that probably cost more than my car, but her smile never reached her eyes. "Attention, everyone," Monica announced. "We have a very special surprise for our birthday girl. Grandfather Richard and I have commissioned a custom gift flown in directly from Switzerland this morning." 2 waiters brought out a massive box wrapped in gold paper. Lily ran forward, her eyes wide with excitement. She tore open the paper. Inside sat a gigantic brown teddy bear. It was nearly as big as she was. The guests oohed and awed. "It is a collector's edition," Richard boasted, puffing out his chest. "Hand-stitched. Only 5 in the world." Lily wrapped her arms around the bear to hug it. I watched her face. I expected a smile. Instead, her expression faltered. She pulled back slightly, looking confused. She hugged it again tentatively, and then she looked at me. Her eyes were pleading. I set my glass down and walked over. The guests were too busy clapping to notice Lily's reaction, but I saw it. I always saw it. I knelt down next to her. "What is it, sweetie?" I whispered. "Grandpa," she whispered back, leaning close to my ear. "It smells funny, and it hurts." "Hurts?" I asked. "It is too hard," she said. "It is not squishy like my other bears. My instincts kicked in. The old inspector in me woke up. I reached out and touched the bear's arm. The fur felt soft, high quality, but when I squeezed, I felt it. Resistance. It wasn't the soft bounce of polyester fiber fill. It was dense, heavy. I leaned in closer, pretending to admire the bow tie on the bear's neck. That was when I smelled it. It was faint, masked by the heavy perfume in the room and the scent of expensive lilies, but it was there. Formaldehyde. And underneath that, the distinct, acrid smell of industrial packing grease. This wasn't a toy. This was cargo. I ran my hand down the bear's side, my fingers probing through the fur. I felt lumpy, irregular shapes beneath the surface. Packets. Hard objects wrapped in plastic. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I looked up at Richard. He was busy laughing with a senator, completely ignoring his granddaughter. Then I saw it. Under the bear's left armpit, hidden by the fur, a seam, but not a machine-finished seam like you would find on a Swiss luxury toy. This was a hand-stitched job. The thread was slightly different in shade, and the spacing was uneven. Someone had opened this bear up and sewn it back together in a hurry. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I knew exactly what this was. I had seen it 100 times in the port. This is how smugglers move high-value contraband. They use mules, and the best mules are the ones who don't know they are carrying anything. They were using my granddaughter. My mind raced. Lily and Monica were scheduled to fly to Europe next week for a summer vacation. If this bear went through airport security, and if the customs agents were half as good as I used to be, Lily would be the one holding the bag. I looked at Patrick. He was watching me now. His face was gray, terrified. He knew. My God, my own son knew about this. I couldn't leave this bear here. If I raised my voice now, Richard would destroy me. He would call security, throw me out, and the bear would disappear. I needed evidence. I needed to get this bear out of this house. I stood up, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. I looked at Lily and said loudly enough for Monica to hear. "Oh dear, Lily. It looks like there is a bit of dust on this bear from the shipping crate. You know how sensitive your allergies are." Monica swooped in like a hawk. "What are you talking about, Harry? That bear is pristine." I pointed to a non-existent spot on the bear's shoulder. "Look right there. And it smells a bit like warehouse chemicals. We can't have Lily sleeping with this tonight. It might trigger her asthma." Lily didn't have asthma, but Monica didn't know that. She barely paid attention to the child. "I will take it home and give it a professional steam clean." I lied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "It is a tradition in our family, right, Patrick? The grandfather always prepares the first gift." I looked at my son, daring him to contradict me. Patrick swallowed hard. He stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Yes," he stammered. "Yes, Dad is right. He is an expert with fabrics. Let him clean it, Monica." Monica's eyes narrowed. She looked from me to Patrick and then to the bear. For a second, I thought she was going to call her security guards to tackle me. The air in the room grew thick with tension. Richard turned around, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Is there a problem here?" Richard asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Harry thinks the bear is dirty." Monica spat out the word like it was poison. I stepped in front of the bear, placing my hand protectively on its head. I felt the hard lumps underneath again. "Not dirty, Richard. Just needs to be safe for the child. You wouldn't want your precious granddaughter getting a rash from packing dust, would you? Surely a man of your status cares about safety." I trapped him. If he refused, he looked like he didn't care about Lily's health in front of his high society friends. Richard stared at me, his eyes cold, calculating. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't make a scene now. Not here. "Fine," Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. "Take it. Clean it. Bring it back tomorrow morning. First thing. Of course, I said. First thing. I picked up the bear. It was heavy. Unnaturally heavy. At least 20 pounds. I didn't wait for cake. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of that mansion with the bear in my arms, feeling Richard's eyes burning holes into my back. As I reached the front door, I glanced back one last time. Patrick was watching me, and he mouthed two words that chilled me to the bone. Run, Dad. I got into my rusted sedan, threw the bear onto the passenger seat, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely put the key in the ignition. I didn't go home immediately. I drove in circles for 20 minutes, checking my rearview mirror, making sure no black SUVs were following me. When I finally got to my small apartment, I carried the bear inside and threw the deadbolt. I placed it on my kitchen table. Under the harsh fluorescent light, the bear looked innocent. Cute, even. But I knew better. I went to my tool drawer and pulled out my old cargo knife. The blade was still sharp. I looked at the bear, then at the knife. I am sorry, Teddy, I whispered. I sliced open the stitching under the armpit. I reached my hand into the stuffing. My fingers brushed against cold, hard plastic. I pulled out the first packet. It wasn't drugs. It was something heavier. I cut the plastic open, and a dozen rough, uncut stones spilled onto my table. They looked like glass, but I knew what they were. Diamonds. Unregistered, uncut conflict diamonds. But there was something else. Deep in the belly of the bear, wrapped in bubble wrap, was a hard drive. I sat back in my chair, staring at the fortune scattered on my cheap laminate table. This wasn't just smuggling. This was a war chest. And my son's in-laws were planning to hang it all around my granddaughter's neck. My phone rang. The screen lit up with Monica's name. I stared at it. I didn't answer. I knew this was just the beginning. I lit a cigarette, my first in 20 years, and watched the smoke curl up towards the ceiling. They messed with the wrong grandpa. I tightened my grip on the bear's shoulder. The synthetic fur felt slick under my sweating palms. I knew I had seconds before the shock wore off, and they realized I was holding their illicit fortune. I had to move. I had to get this thing out of the house, but I could not just run. Running is an admission of guilt. Running makes you a target. I had to walk out of there like a concerned grandfather, not a thief. I looked down at Lily. Her small hands were still resting on the bear's leg. She looked confused, sensing the tension radiating off the adults like heat from a pavement. "Lily, honey," I said, keeping my voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Oh dear, look at this. It seems someone dropped a piece of cake right here on the bear's paw." I pointed to a completely clean patch of brown fur. It was a weak lie, but it was the only one my panic-stricken brain could conjure up. Lily frowned, squinting at the paw. "Where, Grandpa?" "I do not see it." "It is sticky, sweetie," I insisted, gently pulling her hand away. "And you know how ants get into everything. We cannot have ants in your bed." "I better take this to the kitchen. Actually, you know what, I have that industrial steam cleaner in my truck. The one I use for the upholstery. I should just take it out and give it a quick once-over right now." I started to lift the bear. It was heavy. Dead weight. The diamonds and the hard drive inside shifted, making a dull thud that was thankfully masked by the jazz music playing over the speakers. I stood up, turning to head toward the front door. I barely took 2 steps before a hand clamped onto my forearm. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a vice grip. Sharp nails dug into the fabric of my suit jacket, piercing through to the skin. I stopped and looked down. It was Monica. The smile was gone. The polished high society hostess mask had completely vanished. In its place was a look of feral desperation. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the bear as if it were an oxygen tank, and she was suffocating. "Leave it, Harry," she hissed. Her voice was a low growl unrecognizable from the sweet tone she used when the cameras were flashing. "We have maids. The maids will clean it. Put it down." I tried to pull my arm away, but she held on. For a woman who spent her days at the spa, she had a terrifying amount of strength. "It is no trouble, Monica," I said, trying to keep my tone light, playing the part of the helpful, oblivious old man. "You know I don't trust those maids with delicate fabrics. This is Swiss right, hand-stitched. You need a professional touch." "I do not care about your professional touch," she snapped, her voice rising an octave. Several guests near the chocolate fountain turned their heads. Monica realized she was drawing attention and lowered her voice again, leaning in so close I could smell the champagne on her breath. "Give me the bear, you senile old fool. Do not make me ask you again." The insult stung, but I let it slide. I had been called worse by dock workers and smugglers in my time. I looked past her shoulder and saw Richard Donovan making a beeline for us. He moved with the heavy, unstoppable momentum of a cargo ship. He wasn't smiling. He signaled with 2 fingers to a pair of large men in black suits standing by the patio doors. Private security. My heart hammered against my ribs. If those security guards got to me, it was over. They would drag me into a back room, take the bear, and probably break a few of my ribs for the trouble. I had to escalate this. I had to make a scene that they couldn't cover up. Richard arrived, blocking my path to the door. He towered over me, radiating menace. "Is there a problem here, Harry?" Richard asked. His tone suggested that the problem was me, and the solution was about to be painful. "Harry is confused, Richard," Monica said quickly, not letting go of my arm. "He thinks he needs to take the gift home. I told him he is mistaken." Richard nodded slowly. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Hand over the bear, Harry. The boys will help you to your car. You seem tired." The 2 security guards were closing in. 10 feet away. 5 feet. I looked at Richard, then at Monica, then at the room full of senators, business tycoons, and socialites. Rich people have one weakness greater than greed. They are terrified of embarrassment. They are terrified of anything that breaks the illusion of their perfect, curated lives. I needed to break the illusion. I suddenly jerked the bear upwards and then let out a sharp, pained cry. "Ouch!" I yelled. The jazz band stopped playing. The chatter in the room died instantly. Everyone froze. I dropped the bear onto a nearby display table with a heavy thud, clutching my hand, as if I had been stung by a hornet. "What is it?" someone asked from the crowd. I rubbed my thumb, grimacing in fake agony. I looked at Richard with wide, accusatory eyes. "There is a needle in there," I shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the bear. A metal needle. It went right into my thumb. Good Lord, it nearly broke off in my skin. I turned to the crowd, raising my voice to a theatrical level. "Is this safe for the child? There are sewing needles left inside the stuffing." Lily could have been blinded. Gasps rippled through the room. A woman in pearls covered her mouth. A man in a tuxedo frowned and whispered to his wife. The narrative shifted instantly. I wasn't the crazy old man stealing a gift anymore. I was the protective grandfather discovering a dangerous product flaw. Monica looked horrified. Not because of the lie, but because she saw the guests judging them. "That is impossible," Monica stammered, letting go of my arm. "It is custom-made." "Custom-made negligence," I countered, pressing my advantage. I turned to Richard. "You said this was from Switzerland. Since when do the Swiss leave packing needles in children's toys?" "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen, Richard." Richard's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He looked at the guests, then at the security guards who had stopped, unsure of what to do. He looked at me, and I saw pure, unadulterated hatred in his eyes. He knew I was lying. He knew I was playing him. But he was trapped. If he forced me to leave the bear now, he would look like a monster who didn't care about his granddaughter's safety. He clenched his jaw so hard I thought his teeth would crack. He took a deep breath, forcing a stiff, terrifying smile onto his face. "My apologies, everyone," Richard boomed, addressing the room. "It seems there has been a manufacturing error." "Thank you, Harry, for catching it." He leaned in close to me, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a death threat. "Get that thing out of here. Fix it. And if you say one word about this to anyone, you will regret the day you were born." I didn't flinch. I just nodded, acting the part of the dutiful servant. "I will take care of it, Richard. Do not worry. Lily is safe with me." I picked up the bear again. It felt heavier now, burdened with the weight of the victory I had just stolen. The security guards stepped aside, parting like the Red Sea. I walked through the silent room, feeling hundreds of eyes on my back. I didn't look at Monica. I didn't look at Lily. I just kept my eyes on the front door, counting the steps. 1, 2, 3. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the cool evening air. The valet was bringing my beat-up sedan around. I felt a wave of nausea hit me as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, shaking fear. I had the evidence, yes, but I had also just declared war on the most powerful family in the city. I opened the passenger door and shoved the bear onto the seat, buckling it in as if it were a passenger. I walked around to the driver's side. "Dad." The whisper came from the shadows near the garage. I froze. I turned slowly. Patrick was standing there, half hidden behind a decorative pillar. He looked like a ghost. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He was hugging himself, shivering despite the mild weather. I took a step toward him. "Patrick, come with me. Get in the car. We can go to the police together." He shook his head violently, tears spilling over his cheeks. He looked back toward the house, terrified that Monica might be watching from a window. "I cannot," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They have everything, Dad. My signature is on everything. I am already dead." "Patrick, listen to me," I pleaded, reaching out a hand. He flinched back. He looked at me with an expression full of pure, agonizing love and despair. It was the look of a man saying goodbye. "Just run, Dad," he choked out. "Do not go home. Do not stop. Just drive. If they catch you, they will kill you. Please, save Lily." Before I could say another word, he turned and ran back into the shadows, disappearing into the side entrance of the mansion. I stood there for a heartbeat, the sound of his begging echoing in my ears. "Run." I got into the car. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the keys twice before jamming them into the ignition. The engine sputtered and roared to life. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. The front door of the mansion opened. 2 men in black suits walked out. They weren't looking at the stars. They were looking at my taillights. They climbed into a black SUV. I slammed my foot on the gas. The chase had begun. I drove like a man possessed. My eyes darted between the dark road ahead and the rearview mirror every 3 seconds. The streetlights blurred into long streaks of orange and white as I pushed my old sedan to its limit. Every pair of headlights behind me looked like a threat. Every shadow looked like a black SUV waiting to run me off the road. I did not take the direct route to my apartment. I knew better than that. I took 3 left turns, circled a block in the industrial district, and cut through a gas station lot just to make sure I wasn't being tailed. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a sledgehammer, but my hands were steady on the wheel. Fear is a luxury I could not afford right now. When I finally pulled up to my building, I didn't park in my usual spot. I parked 2 blocks away in the shadows of a closed laundromat and walked the rest of the way, clutching the bear against my chest like it was a bomb that could go off at any second. My neighborhood is not like the Donovan's gated community. Here the street lamps are broken, and the air smells of exhaust and stale garbage. But tonight, the danger wasn't coming from the muggers or the gangs. It was coming from the billionaires. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my knees protesting with every step. I fumbled with my keys, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Top lock, deadbolt, chain. I secured my fortress behind me and threw the bear onto my small, scarred kitchen table. It sat there staring at me with those glassy plastic eyes. It looked so innocent. A soft, brown, cuddly toy that any 10-year-old girl would kill for. But I knew what lay beneath. I went to the drawer under the sink and pulled out my old cargo knife. The handle was worn smooth from 40 years of use at the port, the blade honed to a razor edge. I used to use this knife to slice open shrink wrap on pallets of suspicious electronics. Tonight, I was performing surgery. I turned on the overhead light. It flickered and buzzed, casting a harsh clinical glow over the table. I took a deep breath and grabbed the bear by the neck. "I am sorry, buddy," I muttered. I inserted the tip of the blade into the hand-stitched seam under the left armpit. With a precise fluid motion, I sliced downward. The thread popped with tiny snapping sounds. I pulled the fabric apart. What I saw made my stomach turn. A normal teddy bear is stuffed with polyester fiberfill, soft and giving. This bear had a layer of cotton that was barely an inch thick, just enough to make it feel soft to a casual touch. Beneath that thin disguise was a wall of thick industrial plastic sheeting. I cut through the plastic. There was no fluff inside. The entire torso of the bear was packed tight with vacuum-sealed bags. I pulled the first one out. It was heavy, dense, and cold. I sliced the corner of the bag and poured the contents into my hand. They tumbled out onto the table, clicking against the wood like hail. They looked like dull, cloudy pieces of glass to the untrained eye. But I am not untrained. I picked one up and held it to the light. I saw the distinct crystal structure, the way it refracted the weak light of my kitchen bulb. These were diamonds. Rough, uncut, unregistered diamonds. I let out a low whistle. In my hand, I was holding more money than I had earned in my entire life. And there were 5 more bags inside the bear. I set the stone down and dug deeper. My hand brushed against something metallic wrapped in bubble wrap near the bear's spine. I pulled it out. It was a black external hard drive taped securely to a battery pack to keep its internal clock running. I sat back in my chair, staring at the loot spread across my table. My mind flashed back to the port of Newark in the late 90s. We used to catch smugglers trying to bring in contraband in hollowed-out car engines, in crates of bananas, and false bottoms of suitcases. But the smartest ones, the ones who were truly evil, used what we called innocent passage. They would hide drugs or gems in the luggage of a family traveling with children, or in the toys of a kid. Why? Because customs agents are human. We hesitate to tear apart a crying child's favorite doll. We hesitate to delay a tired mother. It is a psychological blind spot, and the Donovans were exploiting it. They were going to send Lily through customs with this bear. If she had been stopped, if a dog had sniffed out the residue on the bags, my granddaughter would have been the one in handcuffs. She would have been the decoy while Richard and Monica walked away clean. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through me. I wanted to drive back to that mansion and burn it to the ground, but I forced myself to stay calm. Anger makes you stupid. Information makes you dangerous. I grabbed the hard drive and walked over to my desk in the corner of the living room. My computer was an old tower PC, slow and noisy, but it was completely offline. I never connected it to the internet, a habit from my days of handling sensitive insurance files. I plugged the drive in. The computer whirred and groaned. The screen flickered to life. A window popped up. The drive was encrypted, but the password hint was simply the date of my son's wedding. Arrogance. They were so arrogant they didn't think anyone would ever find this. I typed in the date. The folder opened. I clicked on the first file. It was a spreadsheet titled Project Phoenix. I scrolled down, my eyes widening with every line. It was a ledger. A list of bribes paid to city council members, zoning inspectors, and even a few judges. Millions of dollars aimed at approving a new luxury waterfront development that violated every environmental law in the state. But that wasn't the worst part. I opened a folder named Legal Structure. I needed to know who was signing the checks. Who was the face of this criminal enterprise? A PDF document opened on the screen. It was the incorporation paper for a shell company based in the Cayman Islands. The company that technically owned the diamonds, the company that paid the bribes, the company that would take the fall if anything went wrong. I scrolled to the signature line at the bottom of the page. I stopped breathing. The room seemed to spin. There, in black ink, was a signature I had taught a little boy to write 30 years ago. A signature I had seen on report cards on baseball team sign-up sheets on a marriage license. Patrick Sullivan. Below his signature, his title was printed in bold letters. Chief Executive Officer. My son. My foolish, weak, terrified son. He wasn't just a victim. On paper, he was the mastermind. Richard and Monica had set him up perfectly. They kept their names off everything. If this bear was found, if these files were discovered, Richard Donovan would claim he knew nothing. He would say his son-in-law was a rogue operator using the family business to launder money. Patrick would go to federal prison for the rest of his life. Richard would keep his empire. And Lily would be raised by the monsters who orchestrated it all. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. The betrayal was so complete, so meticulously planned, it was almost beautiful in its cruelty. They had spent years grooming Patrick for this moment, turning him into the perfect scapegoat. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my flip phone. I needed to make a call, but my hands were shaking too hard to dial. I looked at the screen again, at my son's name. Run, Dad. He knew. When he told me to run, he wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to save the only person who could save him. I was about to pull the drive out when the screen flickered. A new window popped up. It wasn't a file. It was a live tracking program. A map of the city appeared with a blinking red dot moving rapidly down the highway. I zoomed in. The red dot was moving toward my neighborhood. I looked at the bear on the table. I grabbed the knife and sliced deeper into the stuffing past where the hard drive had been. Buried deep in the leg of the bear was a small black disc, a GPS tracker. They weren't just following me. They were hunting me. And they were 5 minutes away. The phone rang in my hand, vibrating against my palm like a captured insect. The screen flashed the name Monica again and again. It was not a request. It was a summons. I looked at the GPS tracker dug out of the bear's leg, then at the diamonds scattered across my table, and finally at the phone. I pressed the answer button and held it to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened to the silence on the other end, waiting for her to break it. "You are a difficult man to kill," Harry Monica's voice came through the speaker. She sounded calm, almost bored. It was the voice she used when she was ordering staff around at the country club, not the voice of a woman whose criminal empire had just been exposed. "I am not dead yet, Monica," I replied, my voice raspy from the smoke of my cigarette. "And neither is the evidence. I have the hard drive. I have the stones. I am looking at your retirement fund right now, and it looks like a life sentence to me." There was a pause. I heard the clinking of ice against glass. She was drinking. "You have nothing." "Harry," she said, her tone dropping to a chilling conversational level, "you have a pile of rocks and a stolen hard drive. But what you really have is a choice. You can be a hero and go to the police, or you can be a father and save your son." I gripped the phone tighter. "What are you talking about?" "Check your email, Harry. I just sent you a little document. Consider it an appetizer." I moved the phone away from my ear and looked at the computer screen. A new notification popped up in the corner. I clicked it. It was a PDF file attached to a blank email. I opened it. It was a bank transfer authorization. $5 million moved from a corporate account to an offshore shell company. The date was 2 days ago, and the signature at the bottom, authorized by biometric verification, was Patrick's. I put the phone back to my ear. My stomach churned. "You see it, don't you?" Monica asked softly. $5 million in embezzled construction funds. That is a federal crime, Harry. Wire fraud, money laundering. And guess whose fingerprints are digital and physical on every single transaction? Not mine, not Richard's, Patrick's. "You set him up," I whispered, the realization hitting me harder than a physical blow. "We gave him a title, Harry. We made him CEO. We gave him a nice office and a fancy pen, and he was so desperate to make you proud, so desperate to be the big man that he signed whatever we put in front of him. He never read the bylaws. He never checked the accounts. He just signed his name and smiled." My hand shook uncontrollably. I looked at the signature on the screen again. I remembered when Patrick was 7 years old, sitting at this very kitchen table, sticking his tongue out in concentration as he learned to write his name in cursive. I had been so proud. I had told him that his name was his bond, that a man's signature was his promise, and they had used that against him. They had taken his trust, his desire to please, and turned it into a weapon. They hadn't just married him for cover. They had been grooming him for prison since the day they met. He was their insurance policy. If the ship went down, Patrick was the one chained to the anchor. "You are monsters," I spat into the phone. "We are businessmen," Harry, Monica corrected. "And right now we are negotiating. Here's the deal. You bring the bear back to us. All of it. The stones, the drive, the tracker. You bring it to the old shipyard warehouse in 1 hour. If you do, we destroy this document. We let Patrick walk away with a slap on the wrist for negligence. We pay off the lawyers. He goes free. And if I don't," I asked, dread pooling in my gut. "If you go to the police," Monica's voice turned razor sharp, "if you even think about handing that drive over to a Fed, I will release this document to the district attorney myself. I will testify that Patrick was the mastermind, and that Richard and I were just innocent investors. Who do you think the jury will believe? The billionaire philanthropist family, or the failed son of a dock worker with a gambling problem? Patrick will die in prison, Harry. He will not survive a week in a federal penitentiary, and you know it." The line went dead. She didn't wait for an answer. She didn't have to. She knew she had me. I dropped the phone onto the table. It clattered against the diamonds. I put my head in my hands, breathing hard. The room felt like it was shrinking. I looked at the bear, its insides spilled out like a gutted fish. I had the evidence to put Richard and Monica away for life, but the cost was my own son. They had anticipated everything. They knew I would check the bear. They knew I would find the drive. They counted on it. This wasn't a mistake. It was a trap. If I kept the evidence, Patrick went to jail. If I returned it, they went free to abuse my granddaughter and probably kill me and Patrick once they had the stones back. I stood up and paced the small kitchen. The linoleum floor was peeling in the corners. The faucet dripped. This was my life. I had played by the rules for 70 years, and I had nothing. They broke every rule, and they owned the city. I looked at the computer screen again. Patrick's signature. "He didn't read it," I said aloud to the empty room. "He trusted them." A sudden violent crash shattered the silence. I instinctively ducked, covering my head, as shards of glass sprayed across the living room floor. The window facing the street had exploded inward. The wind rushed in, carrying the noise of the city and the smell of ozone. My heart seized in my chest. I scrambled behind the refrigerator, grabbing the knife from the table. I waited for gunfire. I waited for footsteps on the stairs. But there was nothing. Just the wind and the settling of broken glass. Slowly, carefully, I peered around the edge of the fridge. Lying in the middle of my living room rug, surrounded by glittering shards of my window, was a red brick. I stepped over the glass, my shoes crunching on the debris. I picked up the brick. It was heavy, rough, and cold. Wrapped around it with a rubber band was a piece of expensive cream-colored stationery, the same paper they used for wedding invitations. I pulled the note free and unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, swooping calligraphy. It was Monica's handwriting. Warning number 1. Next time it is fire. I ran to the broken window and looked down into the street. A black SUV was idling at the corner, its taillights glowing like demon eyes in the darkness. As I watched, it slowly pulled away, disappearing into the night. They weren't 5 minutes away. They were here. They were watching me right now. They could have thrown a Molotov cocktail. They could have come up the stairs and put a bullet in my head. But they didn't. They wanted me to be afraid. They wanted me to know that my fortress was made of paper. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 55 minutes left. I looked at the bear. I looked at the diamonds. And then I looked at the picture of Lily taped to my refrigerator door. She was smiling, holding an ice cream cone, completely unaware that her family was a den of vipers. If I gave the bear back, I saved Patrick, but I lost Lily. Monica would take her away, mold her, turn her into another monster or another victim. If I fought, I risked burying my son. But standing there, holding that brick, feeling the cold wind on my face, something inside me shifted. The fear that had been gripping my throat began to loosen, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They thought they were dealing with a frightened old man who would do anything to protect his cub. They forgot that I was an inspector. My job wasn't just to find the rot. My job was to cut it out. I am not going to negotiate, I whispered to the empty street. I walked back to the table. I didn't pack the diamonds back into the bear. Instead, I went to the fish tank in the corner of the living room. It had been dry for years, filled with blue and clear glass pebbles that I used to think looked pretty. I reached in and grabbed a handful of the glass stones. I held a real diamond in one hand and a piece of aquarium glass in the other. Under the dim kitchen light, they looked almost identical. Monica wanted her bear back. I would give it to her, but I was going to make sure that when she opened it, she found exactly what she deserved. I had 40 minutes to pull off the biggest switch of my life, and I needed help. I picked up the phone again and dialed a number I hadn't called in 10 years. A man who owed me a favor. A man who hated the Donovans almost as much as I did. It rang once. "Hello," a gruff voice answered. "Lieutenant," I said. "It is Harry. Wake up. We have a war to start." I hung up the phone with Lieutenant Miller. He did not ask questions. He did not ask if I was sure. He just asked for the time and the place. That is the thing about the men I used to work with. We didn't bond over golf or cocktails. We bonded over cold nights on the docks, watching for shadows that moved wrong. Miller was ready. The trap was set. But there was one more call I had to make. The hardest one. I looked at my phone. My thumb hovered over my son's name. I was angry at him, yes. I was furious that he had let himself become a puppet for these monsters. But beneath the anger, there was a gnawing question that I couldn't silence. Patrick was weak, maybe. He was soft, certainly. But he wasn't evil. And he loved his daughter. There had to be something else. Something more than just debt or ambition that kept a man under the thumb of a family that treated him like a dog. I pressed the call button. It rang for a long time. I was about to hang up, thinking he might have been caught, when the line clicked open. "Dad." His voice was a whisper, shaking so hard it sounded like he was standing in a blizzard. "Dad, where are you? Please tell me you are halfway to the state line." "I am not running, Patrick," I said, my voice steady. "I am finishing this." There was a choked sob on the other end. "No, Dad. You do not understand. You have to run. They will kill you. They will kill all of us. You do not know what they are capable of. I know exactly what they are capable of, I snapped. They are smugglers, Patrick. They are thieves. I have dealt with their kind for 40 years. No, he screamed, the sound distorting the speaker. It is not just smuggling. It is not just the money. Then tell me, I demanded. Tell me why you let them do this. Tell me why you signed those papers. Tell me why you let them put a target on your own daughter's back. Silence stretched over the line. Heavy, suffocating silence. I could hear his breathing ragged and wet. It was Mom, he whispered. I froze. The kitchen seemed to drop 20 degrees. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. What did you say? Patrick's voice broke, dissolving into a torrent of anguish. It wasn't an accident, Dad. Mom's car accident 5 years ago. It wasn't the brakes failing. It wasn't the rain. The world stopped spinning. I felt a roaring sound in my ears like the ocean crashing against the rocks. I remembered that night. The knock on the door. The police officer taking off his hat. The twisted metal of our old station wagon wrapped around a telephone pole. The coroner said it was mechanical failure. I had mourned. I had cried until I was empty. I had blamed the car. I had blamed the weather. She found out, Patrick sobbed. 5 years ago. She saw the papers in Richard's home office. She found out about the slush fund. She confronted Monica. She told them she was going to the FBI. I closed my eyes. I could see her. Martha. My Martha. Brave, stubborn, righteous Martha. Of course she would confront them. She never walked away from a fight in her life. They threatened you, Patrick, continued his voice, barely audible now. They told her that if she spoke to anyone, if she went to the police, you would have an accident at the port. A container falling. A crane malfunction. They said they would bury you under 10 tons of steel. Tears leaked from my eyes, hot and angry. She protected me. She stayed silent to keep me alive. She was going to leave the city, Patrick said. She was coming to tell you we had to move. And then the car. He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I realized then that I had been living in a fog for 5 years. I had thought I was a widower. In reality, I was the husband of a murder victim. And the man who ordered the hit had been eating my birthday cake and patting me on the back for half a decade. And you knew, I whispered. The words tasted like ash. I found out a year later, Patrick cried. Monica told me when I tried to quit. She laughed about it. She said, accidents run in the family. She said if I didn't sign the papers, if I didn't play the part of the CEO, Lily would be next. Dad, I was so scared. I thought if I just did what they said, if I just kept my head down, I could keep you and Lily safe. I am a coward, Dad. I am so sorry. I stood there in the center of my dark, broken apartment. The grief that had weighed on me for 5 years evaporated. The sadness was gone. The pity for my son was gone. The fear of the Donovans was gone. In their place, something else settled in my chest. Something cold, something hard, something sharp. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. My movements were slow, deliberate. I looked at the reflection in the broken window. I didn't look like a 70-year-old grandfather anymore. The stoop in my shoulders was gone. My eyes were clear. I was back on the docks. I was the inspector. The man who didn't take bribes. The man who didn't look the other way. The man who hunted rats and crushed them. Richard Donovan didn't just steal from the city. He didn't just use my granddaughter as a mule. He took my wife. He took the only woman I ever loved. And now he was going to pay. Not with money. Not with prison time. He was going to pay with everything. Patrick, I said. My voice was different now. It was lower, deeper. It was the voice I used when I caught a captain lying about his manifest. It was a voice that brokered no argument. Patrick stopped crying. He must have heard the change too. Dad. Listen to me very carefully, I said. Wipe your face. Put on a fresh shirt. Go downstairs and splash cold water on your eyes. Dad, what are you going to do? He asked, a tremor of fear returning to his voice. I am done running, Patrick, and I am done hiding. They want the bear. I am going to give it to them. But they will kill you, he stammered. No, I said coldly. They are going to try. But they made a mistake. They thought they broke me when they killed your mother. They thought they broke you by threatening your daughter. But all they did was clear the deck. I reached out and picked up the bag of glass stones from the table. I poured them into the open belly of the teddy bear. They clattered in, sounding just like the diamonds. I shoved the fake hard drive in, deep packing the thin cotton around it. I grabbed a needle and thread from my sewing kit. My hands were steady as a surgeon's rock. I began to stitch the seam closed. In and out, in and out. Every stitch was a promise. Every knot was a vow. Patrick. I said, pulling the final knot tight and biting the thread. Yes, Dad. Stop crying. Stop apologizing. You are a Sullivan. Tonight, you are going to stand up. You are going to meet me at the warehouse, and you are going to watch. Watch what he asked. I picked up the bear. It looked perfect. I looked at the knife on the table and slipped it into my pocket. Tonight, I said, staring into the darkness of the night, tonight. I teach them the final lesson. I cleared the kitchen table, sweeping the remnants of my dinner onto the floor. I did not care about the mess. I cared about survival. I went to the living room and looked at the old dry fish tank sitting in the corner. It had been gathering dust since Patrick was a teenager, filled with blue and clear glass pebbles that we used to pretend were pirate treasure. I grabbed a heavy book from the shelf and smashed the side of the tank. Glass shattered everywhere, mixing with the pebbles on the carpet. I knelt down, ignoring the sharp edges digging into my knees, and started sifting through the debris. I picked out the clear stones, the ones that had lost their shine over the years, the ones that looked rough and clouded. I carried a handful back to the kitchen and laid them next to the real diamonds. To a jeweler, the difference would be obvious. But to a greedy real estate tycoon standing in a dimly lit warehouse, they would pass. I went to my toolbox and pulled out a sheet of fine grit sandpaper and a small metal file. This was where 40 years of inspecting cargo paid off. I knew how to spot a fake, which meant I knew exactly how to make one. I took the first piece of glass and began to rub it against the sandpaper. I needed to dull the surface to give it that waxy, greasy texture of a raw diamond. The sound of the glass scratching against the paper filled the silent apartment. It was a rhythmic, hypnotic noise. With every stroke, I imagined chipping away at Richard Donovan's empire. I worked quickly, my hands moving with a precision I thought I had lost. I marred the perfect edges of the glass, creating deliberate imperfections. Real diamonds are flawed. Only fakes are perfect. I held the treated glass up to the light. It caught the reflection dully, just like the stones from the bear. It was a crude forgery, but it only had to work for 5 minutes. Once the physical trap was set, I turned to the digital one. I sat down at my computer again. The original hard drive was still plugged in. I opened a browser and logged into a secure cloud storage account I hadn't used in years. I dragged the entire folder of evidence, the bribes, the bank transfers, the emails, and dropped it into the upload box. The progress bar crawled across the screen. I watched it like a hawk. 10%. 30%. I lit another cigarette, my eyes glued to the screen. If the internet cut out now, if the power failed, it was all over. 50%. 80%. Done. The files were safe. They were out of my hands and in the ether where Richard couldn't burn them or bury them. But saving the data wasn't enough. I needed a weapon. I opened a folder on my desktop labeled Utilities. It contained a piece of software I had acquired from a Russian sailor back in the 90s, a data wiper designed to scrub manifests clean. I had never used it for anything illegal, just to clean up old company laptops before donating them. But tonight, I reprogrammed it. I set the parameters to execute, not immediately, but on a delayed timer. 1 hour after the drive was accessed. I dragged the virus file onto the root directory of the hard drive and renamed it System Config so it would look like a standard system file. When Richard or his tech guys plugged this into their server to verify the data, the virus would sit dormant, waiting like a sleeping viper. And when it woke up, it wouldn't just erase the drive. It would overwrite every sector with zeros, turning their precious leverage into a useless brick. I ejected the drive and held it in my hand. It felt cold, heavy. It contained the power to destroy a dynasty. I wrapped it back in the bubble wrap and taped it securely. Then I took the pile of sanded glass stones and the fake drive and stuffed them into the open cavity of the teddy bear. I packed the thin cotton stuffing back in, pushing it into the corners to hide the lumps. I threaded a needle with brown thread that matched the fur. My hands were steady. I stitched the seam closed, following the original needle holes as best I could. I tied off the knot and bit the thread. I fluffed the fur over the scar. It was invisible. The bear looked exactly as it had when it arrived at the party. It was a Trojan horse filled with glass and poison. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the wood. I stared at it. The screen lit up with a text message from Monica. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. I picked it up. "You have 30 minutes, Harry. Do not make us send a team to pick up Lily. She is sleeping so peacefully right now." The blood roared in my ears. The world narrowed down to those words. They were threatening a sleeping child. They were threatening Lily. I felt a cold, white-hot rage expand in my chest, pushing out the fear, pushing out the hesitation. It was a physical sensation, like a steel rod being inserted into my spine. They had crossed the line. They had touched the one thing in this world that was pure and innocent, and in doing so, they had signed their own death warrants. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I slipped the phone into my pocket. I grabbed the bear by the arm. I walked to the door, stepping over the broken glass of my window without looking down. I wasn't Harry the retiree anymore. I wasn't Patrick's disappointed father. I was the storm that was coming for them. I walked down the stairs, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. I got into my car and threw the bear onto the passenger seat. I started the engine. It coughed and sputtered, then roared to life. I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles were white. "You want the bear, Monica?" I whispered to the empty car. "You can have it, but you are going to choke on it." I pulled out onto the street, the tires screeching against the asphalt. I didn't check my mirrors this time. Let them follow me. Let them see me coming. I wanted them to know I was bringing the war all to their doorstep. I drove toward the harbor, toward the dark water, and the rusting cranes, toward the place where I used to be a king. And tonight, I was going to reclaim my crown. I pulled my car over to the curb under the flickering orange glow of a street lamp. The engine idled, roughly shaking the dashboard, a constant reminder of the poverty I had chosen. I needed to make one final call before I drove into the lion's den. I had already alerted Lieutenant Miller that a storm was coming, but I hadn't given him the ammunition yet. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 10:30. I had less than 30 minutes to get to the warehouse. I picked up my phone and dialed Miller's personal number again. This time I wasn't calling for a favor. I was calling to set up a dead man's switch. "Tom," I said when he answered. "I just sent a link to your secure email. Do not open it yet." Harry Miller's voice was gruff, thick with sleep and worry. "What is going on? You sounded like you were going to war earlier." I am, I replied, staring at the rain beginning to mist on my windshield. Listen to me carefully, Tom. That link connects to a cloud server. Inside, you are going to find everything. The bribery ledgers, the offshore accounts, the names of every politician Richard Donovan has bought in the last 10 years. And you will find the proof that they murdered my wife. There was a heavy silence on the line, then a sharp intake of breath. Martha, yes, I said, my voice cracking slightly before I hardened it again. They killed her, Tom. And tonight, they are going to try to bury me and my son to keep it quiet. Harry, bring that evidence to the precinct right now, Miller urged. We can get protective custody. We can get the feds involved. Do not go down there alone. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. The precinct. You mean the building where Richard Donovan pays for the annual Christmas party? You mean the place where the captain plays golf with him every Sunday? No, Tom. If I walk into that station with this hard drive, I will never walk out. The evidence will get lost in the evidence locker, and I will have a heart attack in a holding cell. I know how this city works. Miller was silent. He knew I was right. We were the dinosaurs, the last of a dying breed of civil servants who believed the badge meant something other than a license to collect rent. Do you remember 1998, Tom? I asked, watching a stray cat dart across the wet pavement. The container from Columbia, Miller said instantly. The coffee shipment. Yeah. The coffee shipment that was actually filled with $20 million in cartel cash. We found it at 3 a.m. No cameras, no witnesses. Just you and me and a mountain of used bills. We could have taken a few stacks. Just a handful. Enough to pay off your mortgage. Enough to buy a house for Martha that didn't have a leaking roof. Nobody would have known. But we didn't, Miller said softly. We called it in. We called it in, I repeated. And we watched the feds come and take the credit. We went home to our cheap apartments and our bills, and we slept like babies because we were clean. That is why I am calling you Tom. Because you are the only man left in this city who I know for a fact cannot be bought. I paused, letting the weight of the past settle between us. If I do not call you by midnight, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. If you do not hear my voice by 12:01, I want you to open that link. And I do not want you to give it to the police. I want you to send it to the press. Send it to the Times. Send it to the Tribune. Send it to every news station from here to D.C. Burn it all down, Tom. Make sure the whole world sees what they did. Harry, don't do this, Miller pleaded. Just tell me where you are. I will bring my peace. I will come off the books. No, I said firmly. This is family business. I have to look Richard in the eye when I take everything from him. Just promise me, Tom. Midnight. I promise, Miller said, his voice heavy with resignation. Midnight. Good hunting, Harry. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. It landed next to the bear. I looked at the teddy bear. It sat there slumped slightly against the door, staring ahead, with its plastic button eyes. It looked exactly the same as it had when Monica handed it to Lily. The brown fur was fluffy, the bow tie was straight. I ran my hand over the seam I had just stitched. It was invisible. I had done a good job. My hands, old and calloused, had remembered the rhythm of the needle. Inside that soft belly lay a mixture of aquarium glass and a digital virus that would wipe their empire off the map. It was a Trojan horse made of polyester and hate. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For years I had felt powerless. I had felt like a failure because I couldn't give Patrick the life Richard could. I couldn't buy him a mansion or a sports car. I could only give him values, and I thought those values had failed him. But tonight I realized that my poverty was my armor. Richard had everything to lose. He had a reputation, a fortune, a legacy. I had nothing. I had an old car, a broken window, and a dead wife. A man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous man in the world. I reached over and patted the bear on the head, a gesture I used to do for Patrick when he was scared of the dark. "Okay, buddy," I whispered to the bear. "Let's go for a ride." I put the car in gear. The transmission clunked, a familiar, comforting sound. I pulled away from the curb, leaving the safety of the streetlight behind. The road ahead was dark, winding down toward the industrial district, where the skeletons of cranes loomed against the night sky like iron giants. I drove slowly, deliberately. I wasn't rushing anymore. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The fear was gone from my eyes. The hesitation was gone. The old Harry, the quiet grandfather who sat in the corner at parties, had been left back in that apartment with the broken glass. The man driving this car was the inspector, and he was going to fail this shipment. I turned onto the long, lonely road that led to the shipyard. The smell of salt water and diesel fuel filled the car, the scent of my youth, the scent of my life. I saw the gate of the old warehouse approaching in the distance. A single light bulb burned above the entrance, surrounded by moths. A black SUV was parked in front of the gate, its engine running white exhaust, puffing into the cold air. They were waiting for me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I didn't slow down. I sped up. I wanted them to see that I wasn't creeping in. I was arriving. "I am coming for you, Richard," I said through gritted teeth, "and I am bringing hell with me." The road beneath my tires changed from smooth city asphalt to the cracked, uneven cobblestones of the industrial district. The streetlights here were sparse, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced across the hood of my car. I rolled down the window, letting the cold night air rush in. It smelled of salt water, rotting seaweed, and diesel fuel. To most people, it is the smell of decay. To me, it is the smell of home. For 40 years, I drove this route every single morning before the sun came up. I know every pothole, every rusted fence, and every abandoned crane that lines the waterfront like a graveyard of giants. Richard Donovan chose this meeting place because he thinks it is isolated. He thinks it is a place where screams go unheard and bodies disappear into the dark water. He thinks he owns this city because he bought the politicians and the police. But he is wrong. He might own the skyscrapers downtown, but the docks belong to us. The docks belong to the men with calloused hands and aching backs who built his fortune one shipping container at a time. He invited me here to kill me, but he made a tactical error. He invited a shark back into the ocean. I drove past the old cannery that shut down in the 80s. I remembered the strike we organized there, standing shoulder to shoulder in the freezing rain until the owners caved. I drove past the rusted hull of the SS Liberty, a ship I inspected 1,000 times. These weren't just landmarks. They were witnesses. They were my history. And tonight, they would witness one last fight. I glanced at the passenger seat. The teddy bear sat there, staring blankly ahead. It looked so harmless, so soft. It was hard to believe that inside that plush belly lay the power to topple a billion-dollar empire. I reached out and touched its paw, reassuring myself that the stitches were holding, that the trap was set. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded my rearview mirror. I squinted, adjusting the mirror. It wasn't a street lamp. It was a pair of high-intensity LED headlights burning white and hot. They were close. Too close. I checked my speedometer. I was doing 40. The vehicle behind me was doing 60. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I didn't speed up. I held my line. This was a single-lane road, with a concrete barrier on one side and a drop-off into the drainage canal on the other. The lights got brighter, filling the entire cabin of my car with a harsh, interrogating glare. I could see the outline of the vehicle now. It was a black SUV, massive and armored, looking like a tank designed for urban warfare. It was the same one that had been parked outside my apartment. They were not just following me. They were hunting me. Without a signal, without a warning, the SUV surged forward. The impact was deafening. Metal crunched against metal as the heavy bumper of the SUV slammed into the trunk of my sedan. My head snapped back against the headrest. The car lurched violently to the right, toward the concrete barrier. I fought the wheel, my forearms burning with the effort. The tires screamed against the pavement, searching for traction on the slick stones. I slammed on the brakes, then pumped the gas, correcting the skid just inches before my fender scraped the wall. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Adrenaline flooded my system, sharpening my vision, slowing down time. They hit me again. Harder this time. The rear window shattered, showering the back seat with safety glass. The SUV was trying to spin me out. They wanted to wreck me before I even reached the warehouse. They wanted me to crawl to Richard's feet, bleeding and broken. But I spent 20 years driving forklifts on icy decks. I know how to handle a vehicle when the world is spinning. "You want to play?" I snarled through gritted teeth. "Let's play." I slammed the gear shift into second. The engine roared in protest. I yanked the wheel to the left, cutting sharply in front of the SUV, forcing them to brake or hit the drainage ditch. They swerved. I saw the massive black grille dip as they slammed on their brakes. I didn't stop. I floored it. My old engine whined, pushing past its red line, but it held. I put distance between us. I wasn't running away. I was leading them. I saw the gate ahead. Pier 4. The destination. The SUV fell back, keeping a steady distance now. The attack was over. It was just a message. A love tap from Richard Donovan. A reminder of how small I was compared to his machine. I turned the wheel and drifted through the open chain-link gate. The tires kicked up gravel and dust. I drove toward the massive structure at the end of the pier. The warehouse looked like the mouth of a cave, dark and foreboding. I brought the car to a screeching halt right in the center of the loading zone. Dust swirled around the car and the beams of my headlights. I killed the engine. Silence rushed back in heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the ticking of my cooling engine and the distant lap of waves against the pylons. I took a deep breath. I checked my pocket for the knife. It was there. I checked the other pocket for the phone. It was there. I looked at the bear. "Showtime, buddy," I whispered. I grabbed the bear by the neck and opened the car door. I stepped out into the night. The wind whipped at my coat, carrying the spray of the sea. I stood there for a moment, letting them see me. Let them see the old man in the cheap suit standing alone against the darkness. Then a mechanical groan echoed through the night. The massive corrugated metal door of the warehouse began to rise. It moved slowly, grinding against rusted tracks, revealing the interior inch by inch. First I saw the concrete floor stained with oil and grease. Then I saw the polished black shoes of the security guards. Then the hem of Monica's evening gown. The door continued to rise. And then I saw him. My breath caught in my throat. In the center of the vast, empty space under the harsh glare of a single hanging halogen bulb was my son. Patrick was on his knees. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. His head hung low, his chin resting on his chest. But even from here I could see the damage. His white dress shirt was torn and stained with blood. His left eye was swollen shut, a dark purple bruise blossoming across his cheekbone. A trickle of fresh blood ran from his split lip, dripping onto the concrete floor. He looked so small. He looked like the little boy who used to scrape his knees playing stickball, waiting for me to come pick him up. But this time, a Band-Aid wouldn't fix it. Richard stood behind him holding a lit cigar. He looked bored. He looked at me, then at the bear in my hand, and smiled. It was the smile of a predator who sees a rabbit walking into the trap. I tightened my grip on the bear until the plastic eyes seemed to bulge. I didn't feel fear anymore. I didn't feel hesitation. I looked at my beaten son, and I felt the cold, hard resolve of an executioner. I took the first step forward, walking into the light. I walked into the circle of light, my footsteps echoing against the high metal ceiling of the warehouse. The air inside was stagnant, thick with the smell of old grease salt water and the pungent aroma of Richard's expensive cigar. I stopped 10 feet away from them, clutching the teddy bear to my chest like a shield. I made sure my shoulders were slumped. I made sure my hands were shaking visibly. To them, I had to look like a beaten dog coming to beg for scraps. Richard took a slow drag from his cigar and exhaled a cloud of gray smoke toward the ceiling. He looked at me with a mixture of amusement and disgust, the way a man looks at a cockroach he is about to crush under his boot. "Look at you, Harry," Richard said, his voice booming in the empty space. "You look like something the tide washed in. Is that really the best you could do? A 20-year-old car and a suit that smells like mothballs." I lowered my head, staring at the concrete floor. I reached into my pocket, pretending to search for a handkerchief to wipe my sweating forehead. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the digital voice recorder I had slipped in there before leaving the apartment. I pressed the record button. A tiny, silent vibration against my thigh told me it was running. "Please, Richard," I stammered, letting my voice crack with fear. "I just want my son back. I did what you asked. I brought the bear. Just let us go." Richard laughed, a low, rumbling sound that lacked any warmth. He walked around Patrick, who was still kneeling on the floor. Richard kicked the sole of Patrick's shoe casually, as if checking a tire. "You always were pathetic, Harry," Richard sneered. "You spent 40 years working on these docks, sweating for pennies, thinking that being honest would get you a gold medal. And look where it got you. Standing in a freezing warehouse with nothing to your name, while I built an empire." "You built it on lies," I whispered, loud enough for the microphone, but quiet enough to sound terrified. "You built it on smuggling." "I built it on opportunity," Richard corrected, stepping closer to me. The 4 security guards tensed their hands, hovering near the holsters under their jackets. Richard waved them off. He didn't see me as a threat. He saw me as a joke. Monica stepped forward then. She looked impeccable in her evening gown, a stark contrast to the filth of the warehouse. She walked over to Patrick and grabbed a handful of his hair, jerking his head back. Patrick groaned, his eyes swollen shut, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Stop it!" I cried out, taking a half step forward. "Leave him alone!" Monica smiled, but her eyes were dead. She let go of Patrick's head, letting him slump back forward. She wiped her hand on a silk handkerchief and dropped it on the floor next to him. "Your son is weak, Harry," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Just like you. We gave him everything. We gave him a title. We gave him a life most people only dream of. And he couldn't even handle a simple signature without crying about his conscience." "He is a good man," I said, gripping the bear tighter. "He loves his daughter." Monica laughed sharply. That sounded like breaking glass. "His daughter," she mocked. "Do you know why we chose a teddy bear, Harry? Because customs agents are soft. They see a cute little girl holding a fluffy toy and they smile. They wave her through. They do not put the toy through the X-ray because they do not want to upset the child." I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced myself to keep the act up. I needed them to say it. I needed it on tape. "You are using Lily," I asked, my voice trembling. "You are using a 10-year-old girl to smuggle diamonds." "We are using a resource," Monica replied coldly. "We fly to Zurich tomorrow morning. Lily walks through customs with her new birthday present. We get to the hotel, we cut the bear open, and we make $5 million tax-free. It is elegant. It is simple. And if by some miracle she gets stopped, well, who is going to prosecute a child? And the parents can simply claim ignorance." "You would let her take the fall?" I asked, widening my eyes in feigned horror. "Better her than me," Monica shrugged. "Children are resilient. Prison is not for people like us, Harry." I looked at Richard. He was nodding in agreement, puffing on his cigar. They were so comfortable. They were so sure that I was about to die that they didn't mind confessing their entire plan. They thought they were speaking to a ghost. "And the hard drive?" I asked, shifting the bear in my arms. "What about the files?" Richard flicked ash onto the floor. The files are just insurance, Harry. But since you were kind enough to bring them back, we will scrub them. Patrick here was going to be our scapegoat if the feds ever came sniffing, but honestly, he is becoming more trouble than he is worth. I looked at Patrick. He wasn't moving. I hoped he could hear this. I hoped he could hear exactly what they thought of him. I hoped it burned the weakness right out of his soul. So that is it, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You get the diamonds. You get the evidence, and we get to leave. That was the deal, Monica. Monica looked at me with pity. It was the cruelest look I had ever seen. Oh, Harry, she sighed. You really are a senile old fool. There was never a deal. Do you really think we would let you walk out of here after what you know? You and Patrick are going to have a tragic accident. A car crash on the way home, perhaps. Drunk driving. So sad. She turned to the largest of the security guards, a man with a scar running down his neck. Check the merchandise, she ordered, her voice snapping like a whip. Make sure it is all there. Then throw the old man off the pier. Make sure the fish get a good meal. The guard stepped forward, extending a massive hand. Give it to me, old man, he grunted. I looked at the bear. I looked at Richard, who was already turning away, bored with the proceedings. I looked at Monica, who was checking her nails. I stopped shaking. I straightened my back. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, damp air. You want the bear? I said, my voice suddenly steady, deep and loud. The change in my tone made Richard stop and turn back around. Monica looked up, confused. The guard hesitated for a fraction of a second. Catch, I shouted. I didn't hand it to him. I hurled the teddy bear with all my strength. It sailed through the air, a brown blur under the halogen light, heading straight for Richard's face. Richard flinched, raising his hands to protect his expensive suit. The bear hit him in the chest with a heavy thud, the weight of the glass and the hard drive knocking the wind out of him. He stumbled back, dropping his cigar. Get him, Monica shrieked, pointing at me. But I was already moving. I wasn't the prey anymore. The trap was sprung. The recording was made. And the Trojan horse was inside the walls. The bear hit Richard in the chest with a heavy, dull thud. He stumbled back a step, momentarily losing his balance, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping on the greasy concrete floor. He caught himself against a rusted support beam, clutching the bear instinctively, before pushing it away as if it were contaminated. He brushed the invisible dust from his lapel, his face twisting into a sneer of pure contempt. You possess a dramatic flair, Harry. Richard spat, straightening his tie. But drama does not pay the bills, and it certainly does not save lives. He gestured sharply to the large security guard with the scar. Open it. The guard stepped forward, picking up the bear from where it had fallen. He pulled a serrated combat knife from his belt. The blade caught the harsh halogen light, gleaming with a wicked promise. With one brutal motion, he plunged the knife into the bear's stomach and ripped upward. The sound of tearing fabric echoed through the silent warehouse like a scream. He turned the bear upside down and shook it violently. First came the fake hard drive wrapped in bubble wrap. It hit the floor with a clatter. Then came the stones. They poured out in a cascading stream, bouncing off the concrete and scattering around Richard's feet like frozen rain. The sound was mesmerizing. Click, clack, click. The music of pure greed. Richard's eyes widened. For a moment, he forgot about me. He forgot about Patrick. He dropped to one knee, ignoring the filth on the floor, and scooped up a handful of the stones. He held them up toward the hanging light bulb. I held my breath. This was the moment of truth. I had mixed the real diamonds. I found just 2 or 3 of them right at the top of the pile inside the bear, hoping gravity and luck would keep them accessible. The rest were just sanded aquarium glass. But under the yellow flickering light of a warehouse visual identification is a nightmare even for an expert. Richard squinted, rolling a large, cloudy stone between his thumb and forefinger. He pulled a small jeweler's loop from his pocket. Of course, he carried one, and pressed it to his eye. My heart hammered against my ribs. If he picked a piece of glass, we were dead. If he picked the diamond, we had a chance. He studied the stone for what felt like an eternity. The silence stretched thin taut as a piano wire. I watched a drop of sweat roll down the side of his face. Finally, he lowered the loop. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "It is beautiful," Richard whispered. "High clarity, uncut. This is the real deal." He stood up, letting the stones trickle back onto the floor, satisfied that his fortune was secure. He looked at me, his arrogance returning in full force. "I admit, Harry, I am surprised. I thought you might try something foolish, like keeping a few for yourself. But I suppose fear is a powerful motivator." He nodded to Monica. Monica didn't look at the diamonds. She was looking at Patrick. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any humanity. She reached into her clutch purse and pulled out a gun. It was a small, silver semi-automatic, sleek and deadly. She didn't point it at me. She pointed it directly at the back of Patrick's head. Patrick didn't see it. His head was still bowed, his spirit broken. But I saw it, and the sight of that black muzzle aimed at my son's skull made my blood turn to ice. "We have the money," Monica said, her voice steady. "Now we need the silence." She reached into her purse with her other hand and pulled out a folded document and a pen. She tossed them onto the floor in front of Patrick. "Sign it, Patrick," she ordered. Patrick slowly raised his head. He looked at the paper, then at the gun, then up at his wife. His left eye was swollen shut, but his right eye was filled with a confusion that broke my heart. "What is it?" he mumbled through his split lip. "It is a full confession, darling," Monica said sweetly, tightening her grip on the trigger. "It states that you acted alone, that you embezzled the funds without our knowledge, that you used the family accounts to smuggle contraband. It creates a lovely paper trail that exonerates Richard and me completely." "And if I sign it?" Patrick asked, his voice barely a whisper. "If you sign it, we leave. We get on our plane to Zurich, and you stay here. You go to prison for a few years. Harry can visit you on weekends. It is better than the alternative." She cocked the hammer of the gun. The metallic click was deafening. "And if I don't?" Patrick asked. "Then I blow your brains out right here," Monica said, her tone as casual as if she were choosing a dinner menu. "And then we kill your father. And then we tell the police it was a murder-suicide. Distraught father kills criminal son, then turns gun on himself. It is a tragedy, really. But the press will eat it up." I saw Patrick's shoulders slump. He looked at me. There was no hope in his eyes, only a profound apology. He reached out a trembling hand and picked up the pen. "Do it, Dad," he whispered to me. "Just go. Live for Lily." He touched the pen to the paper. I watched him. My son. My flesh and blood. About to sign away his life to save mine. About to take the fall for the monsters who had enslaved him. I felt something bubble up in my throat. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a sob. It was a laugh. It started low, a rumble in my chest, and then it erupted. I threw my head back and laughed. I laughed loud and hard. The sound bounced off the metal walls, echoing, distorting, sounding like the cackle of a madman. Patrick stopped writing. He looked up at me, terrified. Richard froze, frowning. Monica's eyes darted from Patrick to me, the gun wavering slightly. "What is so funny, old man?" Monica snapped. "Have you finally lost your mind?" I kept laughing. I laughed until tears squeezed out of the corners of my eyes. I reached into my jacket pocket. The security guards tensed hands, going to their weapons, but I moved slowly. I pulled out my pack of cigarettes and my Zippo lighter. I flicked the lighter open. Clink. The flame flared up, illuminating my face. I lit the cigarette, took a deep drag, and exhaled a long plume of blue smoke into the stagnant air. I looked at Richard. I looked him right in the eye, and I smiled. Not the fake servile smile I had worn earlier. A real smile. The smile of a man who is holding a royal flush. Richard, I said, my voice calm and mocking. You are a genius when it comes to zoning laws. You are a wizard with tax evasion. But let me tell you something about gemstones. You are an absolute moron. Richard's face darkened. What did you say to me? I took another drag, stepping closer to the pile of stones on the floor. I kicked one of them with the toe of my shoe. It skittered across the concrete, sounding like cheap plastic. I said, "You are stupid, Richard. You checked one stone. One. And because you are greedy and because you are arrogant, you assumed they were all real." I shook my head, chuckling softly. That is the problem with men like you. You see what you want to see. You see a fortune, so you do not look for the flaw. Monica stepped forward, the gun now pointed at my chest. What are you talking about, Harry? I pointed at the pile of glittering rocks. That isn't $5 million, Monica. That is about $20 worth of aquarium gravel from my living room fish tank. I spent the last hour sanding them down with 80 grit sandpaper to make them look rough. Richard looked down at the stones, his face draining of color. He dropped to his knees again, frantically grabbing handfuls of them. He brought them to his eyes, checking one, then another, then another. Glass, I said, my voice hardening. Glass, glass. And oh, look, more glass. No, Richard whispered. No, that is impossible. I checked. I saw the refraction. You saw the one real diamond I put on top, I interrupted. The bait. And you swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. I took a step toward Monica, ignoring the gun barrel staring me in the face. You think I would bring you the real evidence? You think I would hand over the only leverage I have to the people who murdered my wife? Silence slammed into the room. Patrick gasped, looking from me to Monica. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. You killed Martha, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You killed her because she found out. And you thought you could kill us too. Where are they? Monica screamed. Her composure cracked. Her hand was shaking now. Where are the diamonds, Harry? Tell me, or I swear to God I will put a bullet in your heart. I took a final drag of my cigarette and flicked the butt onto the floor. It landed next to the pile of fake stones, a tiny ember burning in the gloom. I checked my watch. It was 12:05. You can shoot me, Monica, I said, spreading my arms wide. You can shoot Patrick. But it won't change anything. Because the real diamonds and the real hard drive, with all your dirty little secrets, are not here. I leaned in, staring into her wild, panicked eyes. They are currently sitting in an evidence locker at the FBI field office in Newark, and the digital copies. They were just emailed to the New York Times 5 minutes ago. It was a lie. A massive, glorious lie. The diamonds were still in my apartment, hidden in a coffee can. The hard drive was destroyed. But they didn't know that. They only knew fear. And right now I was feeding them a banquet of it. You are lying, Richard roared, standing up. He looked frantic, sweat pouring down his face. He is bluffing, Monica. Kill him. Kill him now and we can find them. I didn't flinch. I laughed again. Go ahead, I challenged. Pull the trigger. Add 2 counts of first-degree murder to the racketeering charges that are already coming down the pipe. You think the police aren't on their way. You think I came here alone. I pointed to the roof. Listen. They all froze. Above the sound of the wind, above the sound of the waves, a new sound began to emerge. A low rhythmic thumping, getting louder, getting closer. It was the sound of my own heart beating in my ears, but to them, in their paranoia, in their panic, it sounded like a chopper. Game over, Richard, I whispered. Checkmate. Richard dropped to his knees, his expensive suit trousers soaking up the oil and filth of the warehouse floor. He grabbed a handful of the stones, bringing them so close to his eyes, I thought he might swallow them. He was trembling not with fear, but with a frantic, consuming denial. He brought the jeweler's loupe back to his eye, his hand shaking so violently he had to steady it with his other hand. He looked at one stone, then another, then another. I watched the color drain from his face, leaving it gray and waxy. He saw it. He finally saw what his greed had blinded him to moments before. He saw the microscopic scratches left by my sandpaper. He saw the tiny spherical air bubbles trapped deep inside the material bubbles that never form in natural diamonds, formed under the crushing pressure of the earth, but are common in cheap glass melted in a factory. Glass! Richard wheezed. He dropped the stones. They hit the concrete with the dull, mocking click of aquarium gravel. "It is all glass," he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek that tore through the warehouse. He looked up at me, his eyes bulging with veins popping in his forehead. "You ruined me. You filthy, miserable old man. You ruined everything." He scrambled backward away from the pile of worthless rocks, looking like a man waking up in a nightmare. "Kill him," Richard roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Kill them both, right now. Do not let them leave this building alive." The atmosphere in the warehouse snapped. The air, which had been thick with tension, suddenly exploded into violence. Monica let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. The mask of the sophisticated socialite fell away completely, revealing the terrified, vicious criminal beneath. She realized there was no flight to Zurich. There was no clean getaway. There was only prison or death, and she chose death. She swung the silver pistol toward me. Her eyes were wide and unblinking. She wasn't thinking about leverage anymore. She just wanted to erase the man who had destroyed her life. I stared down the barrel of the gun. I saw her finger tighten on the trigger. I saw the muscles in her forearm bunch. I am 70 years old. I cannot outrun a bullet. I cannot dodge. But I spent 40 years working in environments where heavy machinery could crush you in a second if you weren't paying attention. My reflexes aren't fast, but my situational awareness is perfect. Next to me, about 2 feet to my right, stood an old rusted 55-gallon oil drum. It was empty, acting as a trash can for the warehouse. In the split second before Monica fired, I didn't try to dive. I lashed out with my leg. I put every ounce of my old man's strength into a vicious kick, driving the heel of my heavy work boot into the hollow side of the metal drum. Boom! The sound was thunderous. In the enclosed acoustic space of the metal warehouse, it sounded exactly like a shotgun blast. Monica flinched. It was a primal, instinctive reaction. Her shoulders jerked up and her aim pulled wildly to the right. Bang! The gun went off. The bullet whizzed past my ear so close I felt the wind of its passage and slammed into a wooden pallet behind me, sending splinters flying into the air. The echo of the gunshot rang in our ears, leaving a high-pitched whine. Monica stood there, stunned, the gun smoking in her hand. She tried to bring it back to bear, tried to correct her aim, but the chaos had already begun. Patrick had been watching. My son, the man who had spent his entire adult life bowing his head, the man who had let these people walk all over him, had seen his father almost die. He had seen his wife pull the trigger. Something inside Patrick broke. Or maybe something finally healed. The fear that had paralyzed him for 5 years evaporated. The hesitation vanished. He let out a roar, a deep guttural sound that I had never heard from him before. It was the sound of a cornered animal realizing it has claws. Patrick didn't try to stand up. His hands were still zip-tied behind his back. He used his legs. He launched himself forward from his kneeling position, propelling his body like a battering ram. He slammed headfirst into the midsection of the nearest security guard, the one with the scar who had cut open the bear. The guard hadn't expected it. He was focused on me and Monica. He went down hard, the air rushing out of his lungs with a wet whoosh. Patrick landed on top of him, thrashing, using his head as a weapon, headbutting the man in the face with reckless abandon. "Get off me!" the guard shouted, trying to grapple with the man he had dismissed as weak. Patrick rolled, kicking out blindly, tripping a second guard who was rushing toward me. "Dad, run!" Patrick screamed, his voice raw and bloody. I looked at my son. He was fighting. For the first time in his life, he was fighting back. I wasn't going to run. I looked around for a weapon. I grabbed a rusted metal pipe lying near the oil drum. I gripped it with both hands. Richard was scrambling on the floor, trying to reach for the gun that the fallen guard had dropped. "Do not touch it, Richard," I yelled, stepping forward and swinging the pipe. I didn't hit him, but I smashed it against the concrete inches from his hand. Sparks flew. Richard recoiled, scurrying back like a crab. Monica raised her gun again, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't steady the sight. "Stop it!" she shrieked hysterically. "Everyone stop it!" She aimed at Patrick, who was struggling on the floor with the guard. I raised the pipe, ready to throw it, ready to die to stop her. But before she could pull the trigger again, a sound began to fill the warehouse. It started as a low whine, then quickly ramped up into a deafening, piercing wail that vibrated in our teeth. "Wee-oo, wee-oo, wee-oo." Red strobe lights mounted on the ceiling beams began to flash, bathing the warehouse in a chaotic, strobing crimson light. It wasn't the police sirens. Not yet. It was the building's fire alarm system. When I had entered the warehouse before I walked into the light, I had stopped by the main breaker panel near the entrance. I had pulled the manual fire alarm lever. But these old industrial systems have a delay. They have a 60-second pre-action cycle to prevent false alarms from halting work. Those 60 seconds were up. The noise was disorienting, overwhelming. It bounced off the metal walls, making it impossible to think, impossible to hear orders. "Fire!" one of the guards yelled, looking up at the flashing lights. The confusion was total. The guards looked at Richard. Richard looked at the door. Monica looked around wildly, the gun wavering. In the strobing red light, the warehouse looked like hell itself. I dropped the pipe and ran toward Patrick. I kicked the guard in the ribs hard, forcing him to roll away. I knelt down next to my son. "Stand up!" I yelled over the screaming alarm. "Stand up, Patrick!" He looked at me, blood streaming down his face, his eyes wild and alive. He struggled to his feet. I spun him around. I pulled the knife from my pocket, the cargo knife I had used to cut the bear earlier. I jammed it between his wrists and sawed frantically at the thick plastic zip ties. Come on," I muttered. The plastic snapped. Patrick's arms swung free. Monica recovered from the shock. She saw us. She raised the gun again, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "It is over, Harry," she screamed, though her voice was barely audible over the sirens. She took a step forward, steadying her aim. She was going to execute us right there in the flashing red light. But then beneath the wail of the fire alarm came a new sound, a deeper sound, a sound that shook the floor. Crash! The main metal door of the warehouse, the one behind me, didn't just open. It buckled. A massive armored truck painted matte black with the letters SWAT stenciled on the side rammed through the corrugated metal like it was tinfoil. The door crumpled and flew inward. Debris rained down. Smoke billowed. And through the hole in the wall, a voice amplified by a loudspeaker boomed, cutting through the chaos like the voice of God. "Federal agents, drop your weapons. Drop them now." The chaos that followed was absolute. The hole in the warehouse wall was a jagged wound, pouring smoke and blinding white light into our dimly lit purgatory. Men in heavy tactical gear swarmed through the breach like black hornets, their movements precise, synchronized, and terrifyingly fast. They didn't scream. They didn't panic. They simply shouted clear, concise commands that cut through the wail of the fire alarm. "Get on the ground. Now. Hands where we can see them." The 4 security guards, the men who had looked so imposing just minutes ago, dropped to the floor instantly. They knew the score. They were hired muscle paid to intimidate debtors, not to die in a shootout with a SWAT team. They spread their eagle on the greasy concrete, abandoning their employers without a second thought. Richard Donovan did not get on the ground. He stood frozen in the center of the room, his mouth hanging open, his mind unable to process the collapse of his reality. He looked at the armored truck, then at the laser sights dancing across his chest, and he made the mistake of thinking his name still carried weight here. "I am Richard Donovan," he bellowed, trying to summon the authority he used in boardrooms. "I own this property. These men are trespassing. I demand to speak to your commanding officer immediately." 2 agents moved in on him. They didn't care about his property portfolio. One of them, a man built like a linebacker, struck Richard behind the knees with a baton. Richard folded like a cheap lawn chair. He hit the floor face first, his nose cracking against the concrete. "Do not move," the agent barked, pressing a knee into the small of Richard's back. My lawyer Richard screamed, his voice muffled by the floor spit and blood mixing with the dust. "Call Alvarez. I want Alvarez. This is police brutality. I will have your badges. I will have your jobs." The agent ignored him, wrenching Richard's arms behind his back. The metallic ratchet of handcuffs tightening was the sweetest sound I had heard in 5 years. It was the sound of consequences finally catching up to a man who thought he was a god. I looked over at Monica. She hadn't moved. She was standing near the pile of fake diamonds, the silver pistol still dangling from her fingertips. She looked like a statue of a fallen queen, her red evening gown shimmering under the strobing emergency lights. She was staring at me. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was vacant. Shock had wiped her clean. "Drop the weapon," a voice commanded from the smoke. Monica blinked. She looked at the gun in her hand as if she had forgotten she was holding it. For a terrifying second, I thought she might raise it. I thought she might try to take one last shot at Patrick or me. But survival instinct is a powerful thing. Her fingers opened. The gun clattered to the floor. She raised her hands slowly. Tears began to stream down her perfectly made-up face, ruining her mascara, turning her cheeks into black streaks of ruin. "I am a victim," she sobbed, her voice rising in a desperate, high-pitched wail. "They kidnapped us. My father-in-law and my husband. They are crazy. They forced us here. Please, you have to help me." An officer moved in, spinning her around. He didn't buy the act. He grabbed her wrists, pulling them behind her back. "You have the right to remain silent," he recited the words, mechanical and final. "No, no, no!" Monica shrieked, struggling as the cold steel cuffs bit into her skin. "I am Monica Donovan. You cannot touch me. Look at my dress. Look at me. I am not a criminal." As the officer marched her past me, I saw it. Clutched in her left hand, her fingers curled tight in a death grip, was the hard drive I had given her. The fake drive. She had held onto it through the entire raid, terrified of losing her leverage. That drive I called out to the officer, pointing at Monica's hand. "Bag it. It is evidence." Monica looked at me, her eyes wide with betrayal. The officer pried the drive from her fingers. She screamed as if he had torn off a limb. That little black box was the anchor she thought would save her, but now it was the stone that would drag her to the bottom. Even if the data inside was corrupted, her possession of it combined with the scene was damning. I walked over to the wall where I had dropped the metal pipe. I leaned against it, my legs suddenly feeling like water. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I watched as they dragged Richard and Monica toward the gaping hole in the wall. Richard was still screaming threats. Monica was sobbing uncontrollably. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They looked like exactly what they were. 2 greedy people who got caught. A man in a trench coat walked through the smoke. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He had gray hair and a face lined by years of seeing the worst in people. It was Lieutenant Miller. He stopped in front of me, looking me up and down. He saw the cut on my forehead. He saw the bare stuffing scattered on the floor. He saw the pile of aquarium glass. You cut it close, Harry. Miller said, his voice gruff but warm. I told you midnight, Tom, I replied, managing a weak smile. You are 5 minutes late. Traffic was a bitch. Miller grunted. He looked over at the agents securing the scene. We got the email. The boys at the cyber division are already having a field day with those bank transfers. But we needed to catch them in the act. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my digital recorder. The little red light was still blinking. I have them on tape, Tom, I said, handing it to him. Confessing to the smuggling, confessing to the bribery, and confessing to Martha's murder. Miller took the recorder. He held it like it was a holy relic. We will get them, Harry, he promised. For everything. The feds are already talking RICO charges. They are never going to see the outside of a cell again. I nodded. I didn't need to say thank you. The look in his eyes was enough. I pushed myself off the wall. I had one more thing to do, the most important thing. I walked through the maze of police officers and crime scene tape toward the center of the room. Patrick was sitting on an overturned crate. A medic was wiping the blood from his face. His eye was swollen shut, turning a gruesome shade of purple and black. His shirt was torn, revealing bruises on his ribs. He looked like he had gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight champion. He saw me coming and pushed the medic's hand away. He stood up. He swayed slightly, his balance off, but he stayed on his feet. Dad, he croaked. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. For years, I had looked at my son and seen a boy who was lost. A boy who was afraid of his own shadow. A boy who let the world break him. But tonight I didn't see that boy. I saw the man who had headbutted a security guard to save his father. I saw the man who had been willing to sign away his life to save me. I saw the man who had finally found his spine in the middle of hell. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. Patrick stiffened for a second, surprised. We weren't a hugging family. We were men of few words and fewer touches. But then he crumbled. He collapsed into me, burying his face in my shoulder. I felt his body shaking. I felt the wetness of his tears soaking through my cheap suit jacket. I held him up. I held him tight, just like I used to when he was small and had a nightmare. I am sorry, Dad, he sobbed into my shoulder. I am so sorry. For everything. For Mom. For Lily. Shh, I whispered, patting his back. It is over, Patrick. It is done. He pulled back slightly, looking at me with his one good eye. Did we win? He asked, sounding like a child again. I looked over his shoulder. I saw Richard being shoved into the back of a police van. I saw the diamonds, the fake diamonds, being swept into evidence bags. I saw the dawn beginning to break through the hole in the wall, turning the gray smoke into gold. Yeah, son, I said, wiping a smudge of blood from his cheek with my thumb. We won. And Lily? He asked, panic flaring in his eyes for a second. I smiled. A real, genuine smile. Lily is sleeping, I said. And when she wakes up, she's going to have her dad back. Her real dad. Not the CEO, not the puppet. Just her dad. Patrick nodded, swallowing hard. He took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in his ribs. Let's go home, Dad, he said. I looked around the warehouse one last time. This place had been a prison for both of us. For him, a prison of fear. For me, a prison of the past. But now the doors were open. The walls were breached. I put my arm around his shoulders, taking his weight as he limped toward the exit. Let's go home, I agreed. We walked out of the warehouse, leaving the sirens and the handcuffs behind us. We walked out into the cool morning air, two battered men with nothing in our pockets but the truth. And as the first rays of the sun hit the water of the harbor, making the dirty waves sparkle like diamonds, I knew that for the first time in 5 years I was truly free. The nightmare was over. But the story, our story, was just beginning. It has been exactly 365 days since the red lights of the fire alarm bathed that warehouse in the color of blood. A year is a long time. It is enough time for seasons to change, for wounds to heal, and for the truth to bury the lies that almost destroyed us. The city looks different to me now. When I drive past the skyline, I do not see the towering monuments of Richard Donovan's empire anymore. I see buildings that have been seized by the government, assets that have been frozen, and a legacy that has been dismantled brick by brick. The trial was the biggest news story of the decade. Richard tried to buy his way out, of course. He hired teams of lawyers who cost more per hour than I made in a year. But you cannot buy your way out of a voice recording where you confess to murder. You cannot bribe a jury when the evidence is sitting on a server in Washington, D.C. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Richard and Monica were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I was there when the gavel came down. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just felt a heavy weight lift off my chest, a weight I hadn't realized I had been carrying since the day Martha died. Justice does not bring the dead back, but it lets the living breathe again. Patrick did not walk away unscathed, and that is right. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy and wire fraud. But because of his cooperation, because he was the one who physically fought to save us in that warehouse, and because the judge saw a man who had been a victim of coercive control, he was granted leniency. He served 6 months of house arrest and 5 years of probation. But the Patrick who walked out of that courtroom was not the same man who walked in. I sat on a wooden park bench watching the autumn leaves drift down from the oak trees. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth. Across the grass near the duck pond, a man was setting up a picnic blanket. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were starting to show the definition of hard work. It was Patrick. He doesn't wear suits anymore. He burned them. All of them. After his house arrest ended, he got a job at a custom furniture workshop in the quiet part of town. He started at the bottom, sweeping floors and sanding wood. It turns out he has a knack for it. He likes the smell of cedar. He likes the honesty of building something with his hands, something that stands up because the joinery is solid, not because a lawyer argued it into existence. He looks 10 years younger. The gray in his skin is gone, replaced by a healthy tan. He laughs now, a real laugh, deep and loud, that comes from his belly. Dad Patrick called out, waving a paper plate. "The burgers are ready." I stood up, my knees protesting a little less than usual. I walked over to the blanket where my family was gathered. It was a small circle. Just me, Patrick, and the birthday girl. Lily turned 11 today. There was no catering staff. There was no string quartet. There were no senators or business tycoons stopping by to kiss the ring. There was just a charcoal grill, a cooler full of soda, and a chocolate cake that Patrick had baked himself. It was slightly lopsided, and the frosting was a bit messy, but to me it looked like a masterpiece. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the grass wearing a denim jacket and sneakers. She looked up at me, her eyes bright and clear. She wasn't the terrified prop in a high society play anymore. She was just a kid. "Happy birthday, Pumpkin," I said, sitting down next to her. "Thanks, Grandpa," she beamed. "Dad made burgers. They are burnt a little bit, but do not tell him." I winked at her. Our secret. I reached behind me and pulled out a gift bag. It wasn't wrapped in gold foil. It was a simple paper bag from the local toy store. "I have something for you," I said. Lily took the bag. She didn't tear into it with the frantic greed I had seen at her party last year. She opened it carefully. She reached inside and pulled out a teddy bear. It wasn't huge. It wasn't imported from Switzerland. It didn't have a designer label or a hidden compartment for diamonds. It was a simple beige bear with a slightly crooked smile and soft synthetic fur. I had bought it for $15 at the pharmacy down the street. I felt a sudden pang of anxiety. Kids her age want electronics. They want phones. They want expensive clothes. Had I made a mistake? Was this too simple for a girl who used to have everything? Lily looked at the bear. She ran her thumb over its fuzzy ear. She squeezed it. It squished easily, soft and yielding under her grip. She lifted it to her face and buried her nose in its fur. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She stayed like that for a long moment. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. "It is perfect," she whispered. "You like it?" I asked, my voice a little rough. "It is not much. I know it is not like the big one you got last year." She shook her head violently. "I hated that bear," she said. "It was hard, and it smelled like chemicals." She hugged the new bear tightly against her chest, rocking it slightly. "I love this one," she said. "It is soft. And Grandpa." "Yeah, sweetie." She looked at me, and her smile broke my heart in the best way possible. "It smells like you. It smells like pipe tobacco and Old Spice. It smells safe." I felt a lump form in my throat the size of a fist. I looked at Patrick. He was watching us, smiling, his eyes wet. He nodded at me, a silent message of gratitude and respect. We didn't need to say the words. We knew. We had walked through the fire, and we had come out the other side carrying the only things that mattered. We ate the burnt burgers. We laughed until our sides hurt. We watched the sun go down over the park, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. There were no diamonds on the table. There were no millions in the bank. I was still driving my old car, and Patrick was renting a small 2-bedroom apartment. But looking at my son teaching his daughter how to skip stones on the pond, listening to their laughter echo in the twilight, I knew the truth. I was the richest man in the world. Richard and Monica had chased a fortune made of glass and lies. They had built a castle on a foundation of sand, and they were buried when the tide came in. I had built my life on something harder, something more durable than diamond. I built it on loyalty. I built it on the refusal to look away when things got ugly. I leaned back on the grass, watching the first stars appear. I lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the cool evening air. I took the old cargo knife out of my pocket, turning it over in my hand. It was just a tool. But in the right hands, even a rusty tool can dismantle a kingdom. I am Harry Sullivan. I am a cargo inspector. I am a father. And I am a grandfather. And if anyone ever tries to hurt the people I love again, they will find out that the old man in the cheap suit is the most dangerous storm they will ever encounter. True wealth isn't what you can carry in your pocket. It is what you carry in your heart. And tonight, my heart is full. The lesson I want you to take from my story is simple, but often forgotten in a world obsessed with appearances. Never underestimate the power of integrity. My in-laws thought their money and influence made them untouchable, and they thought my poverty made me weak. They were wrong. Real strength doesn't come from a bank account. It comes from having something worth fighting for. When you stand on the truth, even if you are standing alone, you are more powerful than an army of liars. Protect your family, trust your instincts, and remember that the most valuable things in life are the ones that cannot be bought, sold, or smuggled. If this story moved you, if you believe that justice is worth fighting for no matter the odds, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me share more stories like this one. And I want to hear from you. In the comments below, type the words "family first" if you would go to the ends of the earth to protect your loved ones. I will be reading your comments and hearting my favorites. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay safe and keep watching the shadows.